Of all the locomotives in the long history of the rails, one of the greatest was called Big Boy, a name by which the world knew an engine that closed a memorable era in Western railroading. It was the last of the giants.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Proper Mucked. Today we're taking a look at a very old Rivarossi Union Pacific Big Boy. This Big Boy's number is 4005, and as you can see, it's not looking too great, to be honest. It seems like the previous owner has done a bit of their own unique paint work on this, painting the cowcatchers silver, and they've oddly decided to paint all the crank pins red. I suspect that this was owned by, obviously, a South African, and they've tried to make it look a little bit more South African, so to speak. So they've painted up the buffer beam, I think a red-ish color on the back of the tender here, which is a little bit odd. Definitely not something that the Pacific Big Boys ever had. And they've added some weight to the tender because these Rivarossi tenders are notoriously light. So my intention is to really clean this up, get it running again, and weather it up to make it look like it's in the last days of steam in the US, which was, I guess, the late 1950s or so. So first things first, I'm just gonna dust off this Big Boy because it's been sitting in my shelf for quite a while, and my intention is to weather it all up, get it cleaned up, and then move it on, because I'm obviously not collecting American locomotives, but I've always wanted a Big Boy. This one came in at a bargain, and I thought it would be fun to do a bit of a weathering job on this and then see if I could sell it on. So I'm going to clean up these crank pins. I'm going to start with a bit of IPA, isopropyl alcohol, to clean them up, and this doesn't work super effectively, so I end up just using a knife to kind of peel back that paint and then clean it up with IPA afterwards. Then I'm going to move very quickly onto cleaning up this cowcatcher. I'm just using some Vallejo black to respray the cowcatcher. There are a couple small details across the locomotive that need a bit of respray, including the cab roof. Bit of a paint splodge there, but I'll clean that up later. And cleaning up the entire boiler, really, because there's a lot of like worn details that just should be cleaned up a bit. And I'm getting onto the buffer beam too, just doing a spray over that to make it look like its original form. So I'm still working on my camera work when it comes to weathering. It's a pretty difficult one. If anyone has ever done a weathering video or a close-up video like this, it's quite difficult to get the right angle. So I'm switching between my Sony camera and my iPhone to get the right kind of shots, and I end up just using my iPhone for this, for the majority of the video anyways. These videos are intended to be a lot more sort of casual and relaxed and laid back, so I'm not too phased about like switching different shots. Hopefully you guys can bear with me. But I'm going to move on to using a dark wash from AK Wargaming to kind of cover up all the gear work here and give it a sort of base layer of weathering and a little bit of definition. In the interest of time, I'm not going to show you me painting both sides, just trust that I've done both equally. And I'm going to move swiftly along to airbrushing already at this level. I'm using a dark brown from Vallejo to give it kind of a base muddy sort of look. And I'm going to go all the way across all the valve gear and wheel sets, just the entire lower level, just to kind of give it a bit more definition, make it a little bit darker, and make it look a little bit more used. And this already is bringing it to life a little bit more. I'm also going to kind of get a little bit below the smoke box, just to add a little bit of more definition around that silver smoke box area. And while I'm doing this, I'm just making sure that I'm always testing the locomotive to make sure that all the gear is running smoothly and cleanly. And of course, making sure that with each rotation of the locomotive's wheel set, I paint the other side so that we have an even spread. Next up, I'm moving on to my absolute favorite tool in weathering, which is the Tamiya Weathering Master set. And I'm going to start off with the Snow White to create some water effects, some dry water effects. This usually happens over time from steam locomotives with water spilling out of the safety valves, and it creates a residue. But I'm going to go kind of crazy with this and cover up everything. One of the things I'm focusing on here is creating an ash effect around the firebox just to give it a bit more definition. If you look at a lot of photos of Big Boys, you'll often see this is a very, very heavily weathered and ashy looking area. I'm also going to give it a bit more definition around some of the pipe work, as if some water has dried up around that area. Using photographic references and making sure I've got these areas correct and that I'm weathering the right spots. I'm not super familiar with big boys, but based on the photographs I've seen, this looks about right. One of the things I always seem to forget is that weathering initially and then doing a top layer of air spray or air color is that you lose a lot of this definition, but I know it's still there and you can still see it in the end result, so don't stress too much. So I'm just finding areas where water would have dried up over time and been used a lot. So around the cylinders, there certainly seems to be a lot of that, as well as, of course, the safety valves. Pretty difficult navigating around these handrails. I don't want to pull them out personally, so I'm just kind of making it work. And as you can see, I've gone kind of crazy here. But we're going to water it down a little bit because I do feel like it's perhaps a little bit too severe. So I'm actually going to use just a wet brush and go straight over these powders and kind of tone it all down a little bit. I really enjoy doing these weathering videos. I enjoy the act of weathering. I think it's absolutely brilliant fun, making something look really grimy. I haven't historically had a lot of success with these videos, but it's something that I'm fairly committed to and will continue doing. So if you're interested, do let me know in the comments below if this is something you want to see more of or less of. Otherwise, I'll be continuing with my usual programming. Now, this is obviously an HO scale model, but I would absolutely love to see comparatively in size what a 00 Big Boy looks like next to something like the Flying Scotsman, just for pure scale reference, because these things are absolute monsters. So I'm going to start adding some rust details here with the Humbrol Rust Wash, and you'll see where we're going to go with this. This is like a really fun little tool to use because you can really start adding a lot more smaller rust details, especially around this ash pan and firebox area. Create a couple small streaks, and all of these will really start popping later once we add our final sort of coats of weathering. I don't feel like I have to be super specific because, you know, every Big Boy was different and they had different running characteristics. I mean, you obviously had standardized characteristics, but you know, each locomotive is its own thing. They're their own personalities, they're their own engines. They've all got different mannerisms and things that would go wrong or leak in some different places. But using the images as reference, I'm kind of just freehanding this a little bit, giving it a little bit more definition and color and interest all across the locomotive. I want to give the impression that sort of rust is sort of setting in at certain parts of the paint work, and I'm going to use that particularly around the smoke box area. I think that looks quite interesting and adds a bit of definition. So yeah, I'm happy with how this is looking. It's time to get on to a bit more sort of serious weathering and base coats. So we're going to start with the lower half of the locomotive, and I'm using a mix of Vallejo Sand Brown and Dark Umber to kind of create a sort of muddy mix. And I'm going to spray that basically over the entire lower half of the locomotive, just giving it a sandy, worn, used look, like it's been running the lines across America for many years, and it's very tired and hasn't been washed in quite some time. I'm going to do the same to the tender, of course. Got to keep matching the two together just so that we've got some continuity, and I'm just adding those details to it too, just giving it some definition. Couple things missing from this Big Boy. It seems like the Union Pacific badge on the front of the locomotive, I don't know if that was ever included with the Rivarossi model, but that's certainly missing. The front bulb is missing on the lights, even though there is definitely a lighting system as part of the locomotive based on the wiring that I've seen. That's missing, and unfortunately the head code numbers are also missing, but there's nothing I can really do about that other than make it look super grimy, like they've disappeared in all the grime. And so we're going to move on to the smoke effect. I've used a mix of Vallejo black with just a little bit of white. I'd say about 90% black to 10% white, just to give us a slightly off black as a soot color that we're going to just cover the entire top of the locomotive with. Again, probably lose a little bit too much of the weathering here while doing this. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to redo some of the sort of water effects and a couple of the rust effects on the top of the boiler. But I'm happy with the color of the soot overall. It makes it look quite dirty and grimy, and I think it's looking good so far. So at this stage, just adding a couple more Tamiya weathering powders, especially the soot color, I'm quite happy with where it's going right now. I've also just done a little bit of oil work around some of the pipe work at the bottom of the locomotive, and I think that looks really, really good. Like they've been sort of sitting there for a long time and been covered up with different layers of grime and dust. And to be honest with you, I'm pretty happy with how it's looking at this point, but there are some smaller details that I'm just going to add to the locomotive to kind of zhuzh it up, make it look a little bit more authentic, and just make sure that obviously it's still all running. Like this is probably one of the most important parts. Is, you know, I intend for this to kind of be a shelf queen, but I do want to make sure that it still runs. But with the final bits done, it's time to move on to the glamour shots, and here we are. I am really, really happy with how this came out. This really is supposed to represent the end of the Big Boy's lifetime of mainline working service. 4005, I believe, is a preserved locomotive. Not too sure about that one. And the finished product, to me, I think looks absolutely awesome. It really, really does look super used and abused. So I'm really, really happy with this. This project took me about 6 hours or so, obviously drying time not counted, but in total it really was a lot of fun to put together. And I'm a big fan, obviously, of Big Boys. I mean, I think any steam lover enjoys a good old Big Boy. That sounds quite suggestive, but at the end of the day, it's really one of those super special locomotives, and to be able to have an opportunity to weather this and put it together, I'm really, really happy with. I've already got somebody interested in this particular model and they're looking to purchase it from me, so I'm very happily going to move it on to a good home where it'll either end up a shelf queen or running on somebody's layout. It's not running great, I will admit, but it runs nonetheless. But I thoroughly enjoyed this project, and at the end of the day, it's just good fun to weather something like this. Let me know what you guys think about it and about, you know, the idea of the weathering series as a whole. Not too sure it's got long legs, so to speak, whether it'll continue or be a mainstay of my programming, but I do enjoy it and I do enjoy sharing it with you guys. Anyways, that's it for today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Keep your engines fired and stay on track. All the best.